Thanks for coming here to listen to me talk about storytelling for live service games, which is going to be today's topic. I'm going to start with a general introduction of myself and the topic, then continue talking about how we can use television as a source of inspiration when we write for video games, then go more into detail regarding how to write for live games in specific. Then I'm going to mention an example that I worked on and then do a little summary and takeaway in the end. So about me, my name is Val. I'm a senior narrative designer and game writer, and I've worked in the industry for about 9 years in total now. I got my start working for Daedalic Entertainment when they were still developing mostly point-and-click adventures. So I was working on The Night of the Rabbit and The Pillars of the Earth. Then I started working for King, the developers of Candy Crush, where I was a narrative designer and game designer on several of the Candy Crush games. There are several. Then I started working for UBISOFT around 3.5 years ago, where I worked on Wild Arena Survivors, which is going to be the example that I'm talking about. So this is a live service game. I also worked on Mighty Quest Rogue Palace, a narrative-driven roguelite game, and other not officially announced stuff yet. So, and something relevant for the topic is also that I published a book about storytelling for live service games last December. So basically, my talk is going to be based on both my personal experience working on games like this and my book, which was based on my experience working on games like this. So the thing about live service games is that when you want to tell a story during these games, this story needs to go on for as long as that live service game stays live. So ideally, forever. I mean, we all know that usually live service games don't go on forever, but a few have been going on for a very long time. And even then, telling a story that goes on for that long is a challenge. But firstly, it's important to think about why we would even care about this, because if we want a game to just continue going, why not take away the narrative and just make a gameplay-focused thing? This is because narrative design is important for player motivation, to give them a framework of why they do something, what they do it for, and also how to do it. Like if they have a narrative framework, they understand things more easily and have a more emotional connection to it. And this directly influences player retention, so how long they want to stay with your game. And with a live service game, you want to stay with you for a long time. Then it also helps in learning and understanding the gameplay elements. If something has a story attached to it, it can be put into context more easily. Like, for example, if you find a key, you know that you're going to open a door with it, because that is the narrative framework of that item. It could be something completely different. It could be a stone that opens a gate. But if you just have that stone and it's not called key of something, then players are going to be like, okay, that's a stone. What do I do with it? And they would only understand later what it is. So the narrative framework influences how quickly people understand things and how easily they retain that information. Then related to player retention is also brand loyalty. If there are characters that they love, if there's a story that they're engaging with, they're more likely to develop a brand loyalty and want to play that game longer or other games of that same developer. And it just feels like a coherent whole if every design decision is based on a narrative core that you decided on. So if we want to look into how to tell stories for live service games, we don't have to start from scratch. There are other media that have done this before. There are comics and serials, so chapters of novels or magazines that tell a story chapter by chapter over a long time. There are TV shows, tabletop RPGs, and also like semi-scripted sports with like planned rivalries and showdowns, like wrestling. But for today, we're gonna focus on the TV shows as inspiration. So basically, TV shows and live games actually share a lot of things. They basically have TV shows are episodic in the sense that they have episodes that contain an arc and a season that contains an arc spanning across these episodes. And live service games also have that to a smaller or bigger degree, but if you look at mission structure or quest structure, or just game loops, we have that episodic sequence of dramatic moments in video games anyway. Then TV shows have a seasonal release or episodic release, and live games also. They have seasonal content drops. And TV shows usually are shown time-specific, so they're broadcasted at a specific time, or nowadays it's more of a permanent release where the whole season or half of the season drops on video-on-demand services. And in video games, it can also be like permanent or time-limited or time-specific. Basically, the differences are that in TV shows, we have passive audiences, they're just watching, and in live games, we have active audiences. They're participating in the action, they're doing something, they have a choice in what they see and when they see it, perhaps even choices, like gameplay choices. And TV shows have a predetermined pacing, like you start the episode and then the episode is like 30 minutes or an hour long, and that's the predetermined pacing. And with video games, it can go differently depending on how well the player plays, how much luck they have, how much money they spend, and so on and so forth. And TV shows have one progression. You start with the first episode and then you watch them in sequence, and live games can have several progressions. And narrative design as a method of storytelling, so imbuing other game elements with narrative such as items, skins, maps becomes more important because plot and dialogue isn't the only way to tell a story. So as you can see, like this up there is where TV shows can inspire us, where we can take them as like a basic framework that we can build upon. And this is where games are unique and go beyond what TV shows can do. So this is a reduced version of all the things that we can take from TV shows. But today I'm going to go into the elements of continuity, key moments, episode structure, and A, B, and C plots. Basically, in TV, there are different continuity structures that a TV show may adhere to. They can be episodic, which are completely self-contained or mostly self-contained episodes that can be watched in any order, which means that there is usually little dependencies between the episodes, and character growth is limited to an episode and either reset completely or so small or slow or irrelevant that it doesn't really impair your watching enjoyment if you watch them out of order. And growth is usually happening slowly and from one season to the next season rather than across one season. Then there's the serial, which is more plot-driven and basically a chronological sequence of episodes that build upon each other. Watching those out of order would be very confusing to audiences. They would be missing a lot of information, and they are meant to be watched in order. Very often, episodic series are shorter and more comedic, or for younger audiences, like cartoons. And serials are usually more the prestige dramas that are like 1 hour long. This is just like a general trend. And then there's also the anthology series that basically have very strong growth, but contain to one episode. And they can also be watched out of order because they're like short stories that are connected to each other because of their theming, world building, or something like this. So they're basically distinct from the others because the episodic series usually always has the same core cast in different situations, and the anthology series can have completely different protagonists from one episode to the next. Then the next element is season key moments, which can happen in any TV show. It doesn't really matter which genre or which continuity. They often, not always, but often have a season premiere that introduces the conflict and theme of the season. And the central characters, who's going to be relevant, what are they going to deal with. And even with episodic TV shows that have self-contained episodes, this can give us the new framework of the season. Like this season, they're on a vacation and all the episodes are gonna take place during that vacation, even though you can watch them out of order. Then there's an optional mid-season twist that refers directly to the core conflict introduced in the premiere, which basically reassesses our expectations, how they're gonna solve this main conflict. And then the season finale, which can be 1 or 2 episodes that wrap up that conflict, either by failure or succeeding, or an unexpected twist, or some kind of character development. And if applied to life games, these key moments can also be applied, but they don't have to be part of like an episodic like main mission structure, for example. That would be a very easy and obvious way to apply them. We have 10 missions for that season, and they're chronological, and we apply these key moments to these missions. That is, of course, possible, that we just apply it to that progression. But they can also be applied through the changes from one season to the next, and that can be gameplay changes, season changes, changes in the description of a character bio, changes in how a character is portrayed. Like in season 1, they have a heroic outfit, and in season 2, they're the dark version and they look evil, and that is basically the plot development. And they can also be implemented as a live event or a time-limited event, so content that is only available for a limited time or during a specific point in time, like a live broadcast. These live events that are there for a specific point in time have been done in, for example, Fortnite and Roblox, where it was often used for season finales or live concerts or something like this, where players would have to be around to actually participate in that event at a specific point in time. And yeah, we can do that in regards to the season key moments as well, that we just take this season key moment where the conflict is introduced or resolved, and it's portrayed in a time-limited event that players then can participate in. Yeah, the writing an episode thing is going to be fairly, just going to briefly go over it, since this is probably very familiar to a lot of you. A TV show episode is usually structured in a 3 or 5 act structure, with a teaser or cold open in the beginning and a tag or cliffhanger in the end. So basically, we start with something that is like right in the action, that is meant to grab the audience's attention, or it's just a joke that is vaguely relevant to the topic. And then we have either 3 or 5 acts, which is the typical conflict is introduced, action is being taken, and then there's a resolution, or a more detailed structure where it's exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So classical stuff. And the tag / cliffhanger in TV writing is basically either a joke at the end of the episode, which is kind of like an epilogue joke, or a cliffhanger that hints at more to come, so that the conflict isn't fully resolved, but oh, there's something new. Oh, this is how the series is going to continue. And yeah, this can be applied to all sorts of things in games. Most obviously, quests and missions, because they are usually inherently structured like that anyway. Where we have the introduction to the mission, what is the player meant to do, then we have action, player doing something, and then resolution, player getting a reward for doing the thing. And ideally seeing how that was relevant in the game world, how they changed the game world through their actions. And yeah, depending on how big that unit is, it can be like 3-act or 5-act. And an act doesn't have to be a dialogue, it can be the player actions themselves and the gameplay. And yeah, these episodes in games can be linear, non-linear, or partially non-linear. So to go back to the continuity, they don't have to like build upon each other like episodes and TV shows can. Then A, B, and C plots. This is basically how an individual episode is structured beyond the dramatic arc. They often have what is called an A plot, which is basically the main storyline of the episode, what the main characters are going to spend the most time on, the most screen time as well. And then there's the B plot, which is usually meant to mirror the A plot, but with side characters. So kind of expand on the theme with a shorter side story. And there's the C plot, which is also called runner, which can be a running gag that refers to something that happened in previous episodes. Or it can be like a continuity of some sort, referring to something that happened before, which audiences may or may not know about. And yeah, if we want to apply that to games, we can, of course, do that like we would do for television with our like main story progression or side story progression, where we apply these A, B, and C plots like there somehow. But since we are another medium, we also have the opportunity to separate these focuses into different progressions, which the player can then progress with more agency. So, for example, the A plot could be tied to the main gameplay, which means that when they participate in the core gameplay that they're meant to engage in the most often, they progress this A plot. And the B plot can be tied to side gameplay, which could be a feature or playing as specific characters, playing in a specific region, and that is tied to side stories that mirror the themes of the main story. So that could be more focused on individual characters or side characters. And the C plot is a bit of a special case. It can be basically the feedback to previous player actions or to previous events in the game that have already happened. Yeah, but since we have that element of interactivity, the C plot can be anything that refers to what the player or other characters have done before to make the player's action feel more relevant. Now I'm gonna go a little bit deeper into what makes writing for life games unique. there are so many different tools we have for telling stories in video games, specifically live service games. It's not only what we do inside of the game, but it's also what we do surrounding the game. So your marketing and transmedia content is gonna be part of the whole narrative experience. So you can release like trailers or YouTube shorts or comics or short stories on your website. There is an endless amount of like things you can release, and a lot of live service games do that through their marketing material with trailers, social media posts, key artworks that they're posting. And even if you only have that, you can still have a seasonal story, basically. Then we have the season arcs, which would be most relevant for the storytelling for TV as inspiration. So a story arc that implies a continuity, or can change from one season to the next, or contain episodes. Then we have time-limited and live events, these events that are available for a limited time, usually tied to some sort of gameplay and some kind of story. It can be tied to dialogues. It can be just tied to themed items that you can unlock. It can basically take any shape that your game has for storytelling. And then there's also additional explicit storytelling, so something like documents or letters or descriptions or any sort of text that you release with your season that isn't directly a seasonal story like dialogue or missions or something like this, but just like additional lore that you've dropped in your content. Then further away from story and more narrative, you can have themed game content that reinforces your seasonal theme. Like this season, we're doing pirates and everything is pirate themed. The characters get pirate skins. There is a gameplay mode where you search for treasure. There are new levels where you collect gold, something like this. It can also be reflected in the game changes, so new game modes, new features, or even interface or map changes. Like, for example, you have a season in the winter, and then your map is full of snow, and there is holiday decorations. And it can also be in the game design of the progressions themselves beyond the story content, like dialogue or something, because what kind of gameplay you attach to these progressions, what kind of rewards, what kind of characters, what kind of regions is also part of the narrative beyond the plot. And as a reminder, a season doesn't need to have like dialogues or a plot to have story. It can also tell a story through changes from season to season and themed content. Yeah, and here are a few more inspirations regarding how you can structure episodes. If you choose to have like this episodic storytelling, it can be in season arcs with explicit story and chronological plot development. It can be purely in the shape of season changes from one season to the next, so more of an implied narrative rather than an explicit plot. And it can be in the form of story collections, like with documents, letters, descriptions, which may or may not be chronologically tied to each other, which, for example, Dead by Daylight did, where they, like each season, you unlock more lore documents, and that is their seasonal story. And since I talked so much about like time-limited events, let me quickly dive into the difference and advantages and challenges of seasonal arcs versus time-limited events. Technically, they're both time-limited. A season is also time-limited, but time-limited events are even shorter, and a season usually encompasses a whole content drop, and time-limited events are usually focused on specific gameplay and a specific reward for it. So the good thing about season arcs is the long-term motivation, because it can build on past plot development and can motivate to complete existing content or engage with past content to understand what's going on. But the challenge is that if the season content is not time-limited but added permanently, this means that you have a growing size of a game and library, and at some point that's a technical problem. And of course, you have to think about how you handle first-time user experience and onboarding for new players if there's an ever-continuing story. And yeah, time-limited and life events have the advantage that they provide short-term engagement and are more of a social experience because everyone experiences them at the same time. And since they're only meant to be there for a limited time frame, they don't clutter the game. They're there for some time, and then they're just gone, and you can basically take them out entirely. The challenge is that they must work for players of all experiences, and you have to think about how they're relating to the general narrative. You can, of course, just have time-limited and life events. Then you don't have to worry about that too much. But otherwise, you can also do like side stories or spin-off stories or character-focused stories. So something that expands your narrative meaningfully without disrupting the main plot development, if you have that. And it usually has to be missable information so that players who didn't play it aren't lost afterwards, or you have to make that information available somehow. So yeah, and if you plan your live game season, it's probably gonna look something like this, where you have your permanent content that you either keep on adding or not. That's like a decision, what stays in the game and what doesn't. And you have the seasonal content, which is either time limited or can go into the permanent content. And then you have these time-limited events that are there for a specific time, but allow players to play them in their own time. So like, for example, a week to complete something. And then there are the life events, where players have to be there at a specific point in time. And so you basically build these like layers of story and information that relate to one another and have to interlock and work with each other. So, yeah, the problem is just because you keep on adding on a story doesn't mean it's interesting. Even if you keep on adding new things, players might not stay around and don't stay engaged. There are a bunch of challenges when it comes to telling a story that is meant to go on long term. Like how to keep it open-ended enough that you can keep on going for so long, how to keep players engaged for a long time, how do you handle dev cycles and changing teams, because if you work on a game 5, 10, 15 years, your teams are likely going to change. Then how do you maintain a level of quality and consistency with that context? And how do you handle that players are not gonna all join at the same time? Somebody is gonna join on day 1, somebody else is gonna join in year 5. And how do you give both of them the best experience? Then there's also the problem of player memory. Just because something has happened in year 2 doesn't mean that anyone remembers in year 7. And then the ever-growing library of content, depending on how you plan to structure your content drops, if you want to keep them inside the game or take them out. And I'm gonna go through these like 10 best practices. So, number 1, probably the most important thing, think of a world and a core cast that is lovable and engaging and that players want to see a lot of content with. And with lovable, I don't mean that they need to be nice. I just mean that they need to be engaging and beloved, even if they're horrible people. So that also plays into character dynamics, like how do they relate to each other, what kind of factions do you have, how much potential for conflict is there, and how many interesting stories can you tell with that world and core cast without getting boring and without having to change your game so much that people will complain that it's not the same game anymore. And then the second one, relating to that, trying to keep a consistent game identity. Even though things are going to change, things are going to develop, depending on your audience, which you probably want to react to over time, the game is going to change, of course. But that initial promise, what players came there for, should remain consistent. Like what kind of themes, what kind of tone, what kind of story genre, what kind of story structures can players expect? And so they can grow to rely on getting an experience reliably. When there's new content, they know, okay, I know what kind of game this is, I know what to expect, and this keeps me coming back, basically. Then on the topic of pacing, there is no right way to pace something, like the ultimate secret how to perfectly pace your life game. But it's more about setting player expectations and fulfilling them, and if you break them, then for good reasons. So that you basically make plans of how you want to structure this, how is your release schedule going to be like, and can you keep that up? And is that enough for players? Do you need more content, less content, the frequent drops, rare drops? It's all something that you need to figure out over time. So I'm not saying that you need to decide this in the beginning and then just stick with it, but make plans and then try to adjust them to improve them. Also, in regards to pacing, the problem is that players are very different from each other. So depending on who plays your game, they're going to get through your content in a vastly different speed. And that depends on how good of a player they are, if they have experience in that genre or not, if they are a social player, because maybe your gameplay reinforces social play and allows people who play socially to progress faster. Do they pay money? In live service games, paying some sort of microtransaction can lead to faster progression because of good weapons that they buy, because they can unlock things, unlock stages on the battle pass or something. And also, how often do players play? If somebody is only playing once a week, they will be slower than somebody who plays 5 hours each day. And you have to be mindful of these different players and how much content you release in what time frame to be to kind of cater to as many as possible, or to avoid annoying as many as possible. And then also player motivation plays a big role, because if things are too quickly, they go through it super fast and then they are bored, or if it takes too long, they're too frustrated and stop playing. And you need good short and long-term motivation in the shape of narrative framing, just general gameplay pacing, and also having nested story arcs where you have a shorter dramatic arc in the form of a quest or something, and then it's framed by a bigger dramatic arc, maybe all quests within a region, and then the biggest dramatic arc season or something. So the players basically get little boosts of dopamine, but also have something bigger to look forward to. Then on the topic of information, I mentioned that before. Onboarding is a very special challenge in live service games because players have different points in time where they join the game. So you have to create an onboarding that works for everyone, no matter if they join early or later. Of course, you can adjust your onboarding, but that is like extra development costs. It might also make things more complicated. Then you can have reminders and archives of important information that they need to understand the story. Oh yeah, here's a little illustration of the pacing for different players. That was probably clear from what I said, but just to have a visual explanation how, depending on how fast or slow a player is, their content experience can go longer or shorter. And then just general tips, documentation. This is especially relevant for the changing teams, where if you don't document your approach and your structures and your plans properly, changing teams are going to make it hard to keep a consistent level of quality. Then planning ahead is important. You can't just like write one season and then think of the next. It's always important to plan like several seasons ahead, even if it's just a rough draft, and then going into more detail when it approaches, just so you can better know where you're going. And yeah, making use of the strengths of the medium, so that you don't only rely on dialogue and plot, but think about all the different things that games can do to tell a story. And then the example. So I worked on this game called Wild Arena Survivors. I'm just going to play the intro cinematic so you get an idea of what kind of game it is.
Went from basement hacker teen to youngest billionaire ever. His secret? Founding the world's biggest online black market. A year ago, he disappeared to escape the law. But now he's announced the hottest event of the year on his own private island, the Wild Call Festival.
Reality check. You've got the real deal in front of your nose. Stop watching those videos. Also, no phones allowed, mate. Don't want to leak my masterpiece.
Oi! This one can walk to the camera.
Blimey, hell of an opening night, wasn't it? You know what's the worst thing about festivals? They end. Eventually, you return to your mundane life with no real change.
Billionaire kid. Listen, can you autograph my underpants? I bet I could retire on that kind of merch.
This one's going to be hard to fix. What about you, I see? A worker, a taxpayer, a consumer, nothing but a grateful slave. And let me guess what you tell yourself every night. It could be worse. It's okay. I've been there too. But I managed to break out. Instead of fearing the worst, I chased forward and came out liberated. That could be you too. Thanks to my little life hack. Or don't you miss? Pain is part of the process, love.
Boss, next game's about to begin.
Yes! Brilliant! Get ready to meet the real you. This party shall never end!
Yeah, so Wild Arena Survivors was a hero-based battle royale with 40 players. And the narrative focus here was on the one hand, what you just saw, that intro cinematic, which sets up the world and the main antagonist slash host of the event. And then, new content drop over the seasons, which was new survivors, which is what we called our playable heroes, which consists of design and gameplay and bios and skins. Then we had a marketing trailer besides this intro cinematic, which was more of an advertisement for the festival. And then we had seasonal mission descriptions, which were basically like 12 super short texts, which were tied to things to do. So every week you would get like a short text that was a development of things happening. On release in the base game, we had several survivors and onboarding missions and the intro cinematic. And yeah, the base story is what you just saw. Where are we? How did we get here? Who's the host? And what's going on now? And each of the survivors have a backstory, who they are, where they came from, and why they are at this festival. And yeah, each seasonal drop was new survivors, which included the season representative, who was basically supposed to represent the season's theme and was also a quest giver. And the seasonal arc, which was through these like short mission descriptions, focusing on the season representative versus the host and how they interact with each other. And then there was also gameplay additions. This is what Survivor, so one of the playable heroes, contains. We have the character design itself, which was, of course, meant to be an expression of their personality and background. Then we have the gameplay with predetermined weapons, so you don't choose your loadout. Each character has a predetermined loadout of 2 weapons that you can switch between. They have specific statistics. They have favorite items. So if you pick up an item and it's their favorite, they have a bonus on it. And they have a special skill that is going to be activated under different circumstances. And in addition to that, we have the biography and other skins that basically shed a light on other aspects of their personality or past. Then the weekly missions, they were, that's what they looked like in game. So it was basically 12 per season with like really short text, as you see, like maybe 3-4 sentences with a specific quest giver written to be in their voice. And they told a chronological story. But players wouldn't have to complete a mission to read the next. So just with every new week, the next one would be activated and you can just read through it. But if you complete the tasks, then you're getting a bonus. And the story of season 1 was basically that this character here down on the left called Party King was hired to perform at the festival as a DJ. He does not like the reality, which is a bloodthirsty battle royale to amuse a rich guy. And so he tries to record the violence and leak it to the world, but the host becomes wind of it and gets rid of him. And when Party King returns, he seems changed. So basically possessed by ancient forces on the island. And they have a big season finale party together where they burn an effigy, which kicks off a supernatural events of the island. So season 2 would have been the dark, spooky ghost season. And how I structured that was basically like a 12-step drama, a dramatic curve. So neither 3 nor 5 act. But it was basically like a drawn-out 5-act structure, where it was all about setting up conflicts and having twists and adjusting strategy and ending on a cliffhanger. And that was it about Wild Arena Survivors. So let's end on like the final takeaways, the most important things, in my opinion. use content variety, make use of all the different things that video games can do, and don't think that you can tell a seasonal story if you don't have room for plot or dialogue. Use TV as inspiration when it comes to seasonal progression, and just study TV shows and how they do it, how they do chronological coherency, how they do continuity, how they structure their episodes, how they treat character conflict, and so on and so forth. Then make use of your interactivity and non-linearity. You don't have to put everything into one progression. You can split them apart. You can have several progressions tied to different features. You can have time-limited events in parallel to your permanent content. You can have documents you can find. You can basically use all sorts of different things to tell a coherent whole. Then plan for different players and entry points, mind your onboarding and pacing and how much content you provide, how quickly, and plan ahead and document all your decisions so that you can keep up with the development cycle and handle changing teams. And that's it. If you want more in-depth info, I wrote a book about it. So you can check that out. But yeah, otherwise I think we still have time for questions as well. But yeah, otherwise I'm done.
So we move to the question part. So if you have a question, you can put your hands up, and we give you a mic.
Hello. So you touched a bit about all the features that you use to tell the story through that. How would you describe the process during development of interacting with the rest of the team? Like, do you need to advocate for those features? Are those features offered to you? Do you fill the blanks? How was it in your experience?
It was often a discussion and a back and forth where I would think of my ideal features to tell the story and what we could do, and I would suggest that to the relevant teams, like game design or monetization or marketing. And then it was always a matter of finding a balance between what my ideal would be and what is going to be there and what budget we have. So often when, for example, that mission structure with the 12 weekly missions, it wasn't that I was like, oh, I would like to tell a story through these missions, but it was game design said, okay, based on budget and everything, this is what we're going to have now. We're going to have a weekly mission system. I'm like, okay, how can I make that weekly mission system interesting? And so it was a lot about me suggesting things, seeing how that fits in with what's there, and then me getting more up-to-date information of what the other teams are developing and how narrative can be placed in there.
So you mentioned TV as a comparison, something to be inspired by, but one of the big differences between TV and games is if you miss an episode of TV, you can go back and watch it. For games, it's very common to see just a written recap, I feel. Do you have any thoughts on a more elegant, game-focused way of allowing players to catch up on things?
I mean, there are so many different approaches to this. You either have previous content still available, that you just have a permanent edition that players can still access. I think a lot of narrative-focused game, episodic visual novel games, for example, usually just add content that is accessible throughout the whole life cycle. But otherwise, you can either try to write the season in a way where whenever something becomes relevant again, you weave in a reminder that it's either for players who forgot that it happened or is a short onboarding for players that weren't around for it. Like, for example, in season 1, character X was defeated. And then in season 5, that character returns. And so you just write something in there where that event is mentioned again before that character returns, so that you don't actually need to have players read recaps or play recaps, but just give them the piece of information that is relevant again, for example.
Hello, here. If something in the season doesn't please player, could you like change the future season even if everything is prepared in advance?
Depends on your development cycle. Like ideally, you would adjust things, but you can probably not make drastic changes for the season that comes next. But it really depends on how early you know about it and how quickly your cycles are for each season. But ideally, you would adjust based on like player feedback and your own assessment of whether that's valuable feedback or not. Because sometimes players are very vocal about something and you're like, you're vocal about it now, but you wouldn't be happy if I changed it exactly in the way that you say you wanted to change. So that needs to be balanced as well. But yeah, like if, for example, if players hate a specific character and they want that character dead or something, like maybe if the development is so far ahead that you can't react immediately, maybe you can react in the season after.
I think that's a related question. How would you implement, for instance, branching narratives in a live service game?
Yeah, the thing about branching narratives is that it can get out of hand quickly. So personally, I would suggest that branching narrative is either only contained to each season and doesn't carry over into the next season, or it influences statistics rather than being a tree. So that basically your decision influences, for example, if your character is perceived as morally good or morally evil, and then you only have to write for 2 variants throughout the seasons. And you have all these decisions that play into that. I mean, that's what Red Dead Online does, where you have that outlaw and I forgot the other name, lawful guy, where you have that dichotomy that can also change over time. And yeah, you can attach it to that. You can attach it to faction stuff, or you can contain it to just the season or even time-limited events. That you don't basically make a hard cutoff and like, okay, all the decisions after aren't gonna be relevant anymore, so just we can contain things.
No more questions, so I think it's...
So you said that there are many relations with TV shows, is it right? Yes. So what are your best inspirations in your work?
You mean in terms of TV?
Yes, of TV shows.
I think it always depends on what kind of genre I'm working on. Like, I will try to find relevant TV genres, I think. Otherwise, it's just the sum of all the TV shows I've ever watched. Yeah. So it's not like, oh yeah, that TV show has the best structure. I think if you are working on a game that is supposed to be live service, it makes sense to find TV shows with a vaguely related genre or tone. And if you know that you want to have something more comedic, look at comedies. If you want to have something more dramatic, look at dramas, basically.
Okay, so thank you. No more questions, I think. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.